One of the sad things about the BBI is that most persons who talk about BBI have actually not read the report itself. A few have read the summary, but very few people have actually gone and read the 156-page report. If you read it, you will find that probably a good 60-70% of the proposals there are actually administrative changes that need to be made to issues that are already identified both by the Constitution and by government in various places and by Kenyans in general about changes that we need to make to economy, to the youth. A lot of them are administrative. A couple of things are issues of changes in the law. In fact, a lot of them, some are in the law. I can give you an example. 70%, 70-30 investment in development as opposed to recurrent. It is there in the law, but it is not complied with. And then you have a couple of proposals that have to do with a few tweaking of the Constitution. And even those are not fundamental, other than maybe the creation of the office of the, or rather enhancing the profile of the head of the opposition, and maybe the increase in allocation to counties. The rest of the things are not fundamental. But you will notice that very few of those issues, other than maybe the IEBC issue, actually go contrary to the Constitution. Many of them are either retaining or trying to add on. And that, for me, is a good thing.
Yeah. Why do we need to be adding on while we still have a constitution to implement? Like you're saying, many of them it's because we have laws that are not being complied with. We have a constitution that's not being fully implemented.
Two things, Eric. For those of us who are involved in the shepherding the process of implementation of the constitution, one of our greatest fears about this process was that it was going to regress us. And there are enough retrogressive forces in this country to have moved us backwards. It's true, and there have been noises about, this is not good enough, we give too much power to this, there's too much public involvement in government. So there was a fear that there was a real possibility of us regressing backwards. Number two, the possibility of us changing our governance architecture so fundamentally that destabilizes our system. The truth is that while we don't have a perfect system, we haven't tried it enough for us to say this has failed, let us now fundamentally change it. We can adjust this here and there, but I don't think the time has come when we can say this system has totally failed, let us now try another one. So our fear was, another fear was that sort of fundamental change. Number three is that will take away from the project of implementation. One of the things that the BBI does, which I think is very important, is to remind Kenyans that our problem is not a problem fundamentally of law, and so that to make Kenya better, we don't need more law, What we need is actually to commit to the law that is there fundamentally, and then adjust a couple of things. And what we then say is that if the BBI becomes because this is a government task force report, and I talk government in its broadest sense, initiated by Honorable Raila Odinga and the president, and now owned even by the other Jubilee. So in a sense, it's a complete government project. Government is essentially recognizing that we have a problem. And that problem is both a creation of government itself and a problem of the people. Can government now own that problem? And together we implement the BBI report in a new Kenya. You see, one of the challenges has been the Constitution has not always been owned by government. The Constitution 2010 has not always, there's not been a total commitment.
There are elements within government.
Significant. And so that has been part of the problem of implementation. The political ownership of the reform process pushed by 2010.
Then do you see this? Do you see the same fundamental people within the government actually taking up this BBI and saying, now because of BBI, it makes the bitter pill that we call the Constitution easier to swallow?
I would hope. In fact, one of my greatest concerns about the opposition, when we oppose, is that a lot of the things that are there in the BBI report, even as in government, I would not want them implemented. There's some. I'll give you an example. When you say you're not going to be giving people sitting allowances, a very simple issue. If you say a lot of people will leave government, if you tell members of parliament that can no longer earn sitting allowances, members of county assemblies because they are employed. If you ask members of commissions who earn salaries, they're not going to earn commissions. There are a lot of those issues that are very bitter pill. If you talk about giving tax breaks, 7-year tax break to new businesses in a government that is struggling to raise cash. So some of those things are not so if I wouldn't mind very much if people oppose it and we say let's file it away for another year. I think there are some things that we need to do now and to require government to do out of its own report.
Such as what's in the immediate?
Actually, I would say what we should be doing is doing an RRI, a Rapid Results Initiative, or the administrative changes in the Building Bridges report. I've just mentioned things like the question of the investment in industrialization, the allocation of more revenue to certain segments. The question of looking for a shared history. We talked about the need for us as Kenyans to have one history. And there are 20, 30 of them that are immediate and that can be done administratively without a single change in the law. If, by the way, in fact, that's what we were doing right now, saying let us isolate those things that if government owns this report, start implementing it before we talk referendum and parliament and and where will this report go. Let us extract those things that are administrative, and please, government, this is your report, start implementing now, because you don't need changes in the law to do that.
You don't think there would be opposition even to the administrative aspects? So perhaps even in deciding what our history is, you need more involvement and participation so that we don't rewrite history to favor some and erase things that might not want to be seen.
That is, of course, that is a possibility. But the reality is, let us first recognize that you need to write a shared history. Let us start there. If we commit that, then how do we then, what are the processes by which we will follow to ensure that this is a shared history that is not, you'll always have a contested history, and that is not unique to Kenya. But if our children can understand 70% of what Kenya is about, what was the War of Liberation about? What happened between 1959 and 1963? What happened 63, 66? Those issues, what's and all, let us put them on the table, because part of what makes a nation is a shared history. I don't know how many of you have gone to this place in Washington where you go through monument to monument. If you want to understand why Americans are proud of being Americans, part of it is their shared history, even though parts of it is contested.
Right.
The slave history is contested. The question of the war, the Great War is contested. But at least it is generally known that this is where they are. And that is part of what we lose. So there are very many issues that I think administratively we could be asking government to do. And yes, there will be opposition. It is only natural. But the problem now is we've opposed it. We've allowed opportunity for opposition even before we've identified those issues.
So am I right if I'm hearing you say that there are certain things that the BBI recommends that should have been done already?
They should have been done. In fact, there's no reason for them not to, because that's what I'm saying. For me, the fact that this is a government task, this report could actually have come from a bunch of NGOs, and the government would reject a lot of them. But now this is a task force that is formed by government. So it would be impossible for the government to disown the same proposals, because these proposals are proposals. Yeah, and in fact, they have said Kenyans need to, of course, they've said we also need to read. I'm hoping it's to read to improve,
yes.
not because they're saying we read so that we can remove some. So what I'm saying is that if government believes in the BBI, start with those things that don't require changes in the law. A lot of those things are actually the things that the Constitution required. Leadership and integrity. The constitutional framework for a strong leadership and integrity law are there. The BBI says strengthen the leadership and integrity law. Make the wealth declarations readily available. There are certain things that would help. They will not cure our culture of corruption. It talks about corruption. What are some of those in which we can reduce the impact of corruption? The question about civil servants trading with government. Disclosure, if your relatives are trading in government. Those are not things that need changes in the law. And those things can be done now. So I'm saying that the problem with conversations in Kenya is that the political conversation is always very, very loud. The question about who supports a referendum and who doesn't. The question of whether a prime minister should be there and a deputy. Important issues, but sometimes they crowd out the issues that are most critical for government. More money to the counties. Government does not actually need a requirement for 35%. Because the 15% that's there now is a minimum. Nothing stops government from saying, even before there's a change in the law, we are committing to this BBI proposal. From next year, we're doing a 35% minimum. Nothing stops them. So I'm just saying that there are certain changes that are pro-people. Let us own those and move those. The political ones, there will be contestations, and I suspect some of them will be improved to enhance the bigger government. But I think there are certain things that can be done now.
Those RRIs that you're mentioning, Kamotho, they are not what actually made the essence of the formation of the BBI task force or the handshake. So those things, yes, are those software issues, but if the government started implementing them, we would not feel the impact of BBI. The impact of BBI is what happens during and after an election.
And that is true. And let's not forget that there are certain things that the report tries to resolve in terms of our elections. Because I don't think the problem of Kenyan elections is the integrity of the election. I don't think that's what it is. I've attended at least 2 or 3 elections in this continent. And in terms of process and in terms of openness, of course, our election is, in a sense, there'll always be some challenges here and there. But fundamentally, our elections are actually fair. They have significant integrity. In fact, and how you know is by the number of petitions at the parliamentary level, at the MCA level, at the senator level, which are actually found in favor of those who appeal. A lot of them are not successful. The reason being that the election at that level has integrity. That is the same process which elects our president. So our problem is not so much the integrity, is the refusal, the inability for us to trust the election. Why is that? Why are elections divisive? And I'll tell you, from where I sit, one of them is that because our elections so far have been we have a process which the country is eventually divided almost into two, 60-40 at best. And then you ask the person who has 40% and who has a significant, commands a significant political constituency on the day after elections to go home and do nothing.
Forget it.
Forget it.
For
what
the
is the
next 5 years.
incentive for that person to support that election? And everybody wants to be in government in some form or other. Especially because government has crowded out the private sector and other sectors. So if you're not in government, you actually fail. If you have political ambitions also, if you look at Honorable Mwai Kibaki, he was the leader of the opposition before he became president. Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta was leader of the opposition. Honorable Raila Odinga has been, leader of the opposition. So it's also a training ground for leadership. But you tell this person who ideally is the other face, is you tell them on that day, go home, we'll see you in 5 years. There is no incentive. So for me, if we deal with that, we will reduce, we won't eliminate it completely. We will remove the incentive to throw mud on the election. Because what happens is, because political voices are very loud, the minute that person says this election cannot be trusted, every one of their supporters will believe it. You know what I mean? Notwithstanding that those same people went through elections, they have elected governor on that party, and that governor, then the votes are almost similar. The votes are almost the same. If you go around the country, you'll notice, for example, that the Jubilee votes at parliamentary level, at Senate level, were very consistent with the presidential level, give or take. So it is possible, it's very, very possible that in terms of the election result, they were consistent. That's not to say there were no tweakings here and there, but generally. So why is it that we don't trust that result? Part of it is that reason. So there are certain things we can do to make our elections not have more integrity, but be more acceptable. And those I think we can do. But what I'm saying,
We'll discuss them when we come back.
Is that is not the fundamental problem
issue
in Kenya. If you ask the person on the street 2 days after, or maybe a month after election, I don't think they wake up, absolutely concerned about those issues, about the expansion executive, about the head of the opposition. They're actually very concerned about very serious bread and butter issues. Those are what are the administrative changes.
Kamotho Waiganjo is with us in the studio. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. Spice FM live streaming on Facebook, Spice FM KE. Also on our website, www.spicefm.co.ke. Join the conversation on Twitter at Spice FM KE, hashtag The Situation Room.
Did we really need a BBI? Kamotho, did we need to do this? A lot of what I read reads like the Jubilee Manifesto, curbing cartels and so on. Did we need to go back to the ground? Isn't this the government's mandate anyway, to bring the country together, rewriting a history and so forth? Do you not see that perhaps we were being duped here as Kenyans, and this is something government should have done, as opposed to making out that this is now a solution to problems that they have created, apparently?
I think politically there was a need for BBI. I think if you look back to how the process started, maybe I should say there was a need for a handshake. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then now the handshake needed to produce something, that Kenyans can then work with. And I think the handshake was an essential part of our development as a nation. And in fact, by the way, I think part of the problem as Kenyans is we don't celebrate the things that are uniquely Kenyan. This is not the first time that strongly opposed political forces in Kenya have got together, surprised and have surprised us. 1997 with NDP KANU, what the late Sharif Nasil used to call the MAGA. The merger between KANU and NDP. The 2002 pre-elections, Kibaki Tosha, that was a handshake, only it was a pre-election handshake. 2007, of course, we were forced into one, but we still did and moved on. Pre-2017, the election, pre-2013, Uhuru Ruto, that was a pre-election handshake. And I think that is part of a beautiful culture that we are developing as a country. And we need to own, to say, look, politics is not that serious. So for me, the political impetus for handshake was there. In terms of the content of the BBI, I would agree with you. A lot of the issues there. And by the way, the report does a fairly good job of diagnosing our problem, doing a proper diagnosis of our problem. It doesn't go deep enough to ask why. Why is it that Kenyans don't trust government? Why is it that we are instinctively breachers of the law? Why is that? That's one question it doesn't go to. Maybe it's not important. But I think it does a good analysis of our problem. And for me, that is the one thing probably that government cannot do. Government cannot be the analyzers of our problem, because a lot of them, sometimes the challenges are actually that government. I think for me, the best thing about BBI, other than its proposals, is that if Kenyans are honest with one another, we can now start having a conversation about what is the reason for our joint problem? Because the conversation in Kenya has always been a blame the leaders conversation. When you talk about corruption, we want the corrupt to be taken to Uhuru Park and shot. Because the problems are them. When you talk about tribalism, I listen to the conversation here. It's always them, and they are those people. I think what the BBI report does is to force us to ask the question about our own investment in problem Kenya, so that as opposed to just pointing fingers and saying government, what is it that we have done to contribute? Why is it we have an election system where we totally would kill for our members of parliament and our senators and our governors before elections, but a week later we can't stand them. In fact, now we start saying, you see the sort of fellow we elected, how could we? And the next election, predictably, we're going to elect them. What is that? What is that thing? Because that cannot just be about leadership. It's also about followership. So if the BBI report allows us to do that, then it will help Kenya take an extra step. But a lot of, in terms of proposals then of improvement, a lot of these things actually government can do. Government could have done. If you talk about empowering women, you don't need any law to tell you that this is a country that looks down on women. In fact, we've been forced where we are in terms of gender parity, kicking and screaming, and even where the constitution requires us, at the pain of dissolution of parliament, we would rather be dissolved than include women. And we're not talking about 50-50. We're talking about just a third. In fact, we moved that provision from not more than 2/3 to trying to reach a third, so that even in cabinet we do everything to reach a third. Even the Supreme Court in Kenya, the highest court in the land, does not reach a 1/3. So there's a problem. There is nothing you need in the law to obey that. So Nyeri, I agree with you that there are certain things government didn't need to do. But if now it owns this process, empowerment of the youth, why is that we are a country where if I start my business today, I'm a young person, struggling, I have done all I can, there are no jobs, you're asking me to invest. The taxman is on my case from day one. Immediately. And I have no capital, there's no place where I can get subsidized loan facilities, the youth fund is no longer having sufficient money. So isn't the way to encourage the youth? So a lot of those things are about government policy. When you talk about right now, the taxman has clamped down on everybody, and a lot of people are closing businesses. We don't need the BBI report to tell us that we have a tax system that are going to collapse the economy. A tax collection system, not so much a tax system, that is going to collapse the economy. You don't need BBI. So what I'm saying is there are certain things. The beauty of it is now, this is the government itself. In fact, I want the government to own the report and say it is our report now.
You have
So
too much
implement.
faith in government.
But I
Kamotho.
mean, Kamotho, I've got to ask you, because we've had this discussion here very, very many times, and we've said that, you know, looking at the inability or I won't even call it inability, the lack of will or lack of commitment collectively to have something done. Are we going to see a difference between what was set previously, and then are we going to see some kind of miraculous shift because the BBI has come into play? We're going to say, own the process, own this document and do something about it, whereas you had the mandate previously to run government and get things done,
And you
uplift
didn't
the
do
profile
it.
of your people. You didn't do it. Is it this report that's going to change everything by some miracle?
I'm an eternal pragmatist. The BBI report will not make us worse. You know what I mean? You see, we're in a bad situation. The question is, what is it? In fact, for me, that is the issue. That's precisely my point. That we're not even you see, as a people, why do governments act? A lot of times governments act under pressure.
Yep.
You know. But the problem is, as Kenyans, we're very good at complaining against government and then going home and and sitting in our conveniences. The truth of the matter, if today, as a community, whether we're talking a coalition of media, non-state actor community, we were to say to government, this is no longer proposals by the civil society activists. These are proposals by government. We will hold you accountable. And these are the ways we will try and hold you accountable. How do other citizens force governments to do what they do? Let me ask you, we devolved government, 7 years ago?
Right.
Government was taken to the people, you know. The typical lawmaker lives in the village in Kericho. The governor, at least most of the time, is in Kericho. The CECs, the ministers in that place, live in Kericho. Why is it that citizens still hold their hands and act like they are victims and there's nothing they can do? You have opportunities. So what I am saying is that we must have a reawakened citizen who is not just a complainer.
But,
You know.
and I think you've reached
Yeah.
it there. So when you are saying that this one, let the government own it and implement it, I think that's wrong. Then we should be saying, let the citizens own this thing and push for its implementation.
Precisely. Let the government
doing
own
this
it.
thing will not do it.
Ultimately, government must implement because it's about policy.
But
The
without
que-
pressure, they will
yeah,
not.
precisely. So that is the issue. The reason I talk about an RRI, it is not because we say let's leave the government to do what he wants to do. It is to say this is what we are holding you accountable to do, because these are no longer proposals by outsiders. These are your own proposals. Be accountable to this document that you have told us is the one that is going to transform this country. You have told us this is the chance for Kenya to be retransformed again. 80% of this is your job. Will hold you accountable to do it in the following manner. Yeah.
Can we discuss some of the political elements? I
Yes.
think that's what would be most contentious. Everybody agrees that economically we would want some of these changes if the tax man is loosening the noose and so forth. Everybody would accept that. Politically, I think that's where you'll find some resistance and
Yes.
some divisions. I looked at this and I didn't quite understand what sort of system it was. I thought initially we would be getting a proposal for a parliamentary system. That would then, of course, give the PM some powers as head of government. What we have here is a semi-presidential system in terms of power structures. So we vote for the president, but a parliamentary system in terms of structures. It's a complex hybrid here. But what's coming out is the president remains very powerful, very little powers for the PM. In fact, there's been discussions that as things stand, Duale is actually the third PM of Kenya. Where do you see the fight and the divisions coming here? Because we're already seeing resistance, and most of this resistance is underpinned by these provisions, the political changes to structures of government and so on. Who wants what, and why are people not happy about this particular aspect?
Two things. If you read that report, there's one of the things you notice that it was very cautious in making any proposals that were going to be contested very seriously. So it gave at the political fairly safe proposals, you know. I suspect that if it had pushed for a parliamentary system where the chief executive comes from parliament, there was going to be significant political opposition. And you remember already some barbs had been thrown of whatever you do, we must elect the chief executive. So that's number one. Number two is that the focus initially when this issue got a political profile was about expansion of the executive. So that you have, you see right now we have a pyramid that's very sharp at the top where you've only got two people. increase that to about 3-4 people so that you can have alliance. We are still, unfortunately, we still vote generally, broadly around, particular ethnicities. And so increase that so that you have face of Kenya, and I put that in quotes. What we have done is created actually an expanded executive, but given given a position what are called the chief minister, a combination of what you'd find in Matiang'i now and Aden Duale. It's actually a combination of the two, because it's not just Aden Duale, because this person is going to sit in cabinet in the executive. Aden Duale doesn't. This person is going to coordinate government at that level. The current leader of the majority does not. So what we have done is expanded the executive, but given more power to that person by allowing them to sit in parliament. But also what we have also done is to allow for what has many MPs have been complaining about, is that raise the profile of the cabinet by ensuring that the people who are elected to cabinet are people who have political clout. And the reason for that is to ensure it actually weakens the ability of the president to push the cabinet as much as he is.
Now, that's a major change, given that the separation of powers, that merging of the executive and the legislature.
Yes.
Does it then not negate from what you, being involved in the constitution, would have set out to do, which is ensure that there's checks and balances between the different arms? Once you collapse these two, do we not lose some of those checks and balances?
I think, if I'm not wrong, one of the things...
Hold that thought, Kamotho. Let's come back and you respond to that. This is a situation room. It's 29 minutes to 9 o'clock. Let's take a look at what's happening on the roads, and when we come back, Kamotho Waiganjo is with us. He's answering our questions. Good morning. Sitting on the hot seat this morning is Kamotho Waiganjo, a constitutional lawyer. He was a member of the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution. Of course, he's talking to us about Constitution of Kenya 2010 versus the BBI report and some of the proposals in the BBI report. Kamotho, before we went to the break, you were responding to Nyeri's question regarding that structure of parliament and the checks and balances issue in particular.
When I talked about one of my fears, and I'm sure a significant number of people, about the possibility of regression, one of them was that provision, because there's been a lot of clamor to have all members of all ministers to emanate from the House. Now, what the proposal has done is to propose that some members of parliament, some cabinet ministers come from the House. But if I'm not wrong, they said they're going to be ex officio, which means ex officio members of parliament, which means they lose the power to vote. Because that was the problem. Because the way that government used to run parliament is by shepherding all its ministers and assistant ministers there to vote on government motions. So I think that cures the political need to have political heavyweights, in quotes, in cabinet, people who are not entirely dependent for political profile on their appointment, but also to ensure that you don't weaken parliament.
So how would this work? That means that somebody is elected as an MP, and then if they are appointed into cabinet, they lose, they give up their MP seat and they become...
No, they maintain and that's my reading of it. And
they still become representatives of Kajiado Central.
Yes, you are.
But they can't vote.
What you lose is the power. That's my understanding of what the report is saying, that you lose the power to vote.
To try and maintain a system of checks and balances.
To ensure that you don't have the executive voting in parliament. Because
is that not unfair on the constituents?
Yes.
Of this particular MP? Does that not compromise their right to be represented?
Well, in a sense, yes. I think there are challenges, but don't forget, you ask the typical Kenyan what they would rather have. Would they rather have a minister? So in a sense, it's a trade-off. It's not a perfect system.
It's like a promotion.
But it is a promotion. There's a flag now in the constituency. The other issue is, I think one of the other things I want to say is that let us also not remember that this report is not in its final state. I think there are certain things that still need looking at. If, for example, you base your argument on that question of the official leader of the opposition on the basis that they represent significant constituency, they have a deputy. What do you do with that deputy? And usually that deputy also comes with significant political clout. So those are some things that we need to think through. And especially because you will notice that a lot of these offices, they're also saying that when you move, you lose it's at no extra cost to government. That, of course, is more theory than in practice. The razzmatazz that comes with a cabinet minister is a bigger thing. It's not the salary of 500, 600,000 bob. And that you will still have. But I think that was in an attempt to say we're not expanding the wage bill by having these
Sort of
extra offices.
hoodwinking us to believe.
But the truth of the matter is, for me, by the way, one of the things, if they were to deal with the question of allowances, the cost of government is not in salaries.
It's in the
It
allowances.
is not in salaries. It's in allowances. It's in the travel costs. It's in the, that is where government hurts. If you are to tame that, and maybe one of the fortunate things about a struggling economy is that we all now know we have a problem of the economy, and there are low-hanging fruits. And one of the low-hanging fruits is the misuse of government revenue in those areas. People travel business, people travel first class, huge. I remember one time being in Emirates, and there were 2 tribunals. I can't remember for what. They were all traveling business, and it's not cheap. They're going to the US for some seminar.
Yep.
So a lot of those things would reduce the cost of government. And by the way, even debt. The BBI even discusses debt. The BBI discusses everything, even parenting. To go back, I know Jerry Wood says those are the issues that are not agreed. They may not be agreed, but we don't do them. So I don't want us to forget them. The reason why I talk about them is because I want us to focus on those so that government does them. And we don't, as much as the politics are important.
Well, I mean, you were clearly instrumental when it came to the Constitution, that is 2010. In terms of the implementation of such, or the practice of the Constitution, have we expended it? Have we really? And how far do we have to go? And do you think it's something we ought to concentrate on before trying to amend it in any way?
If you were to ask me, and it's not scientific, I would say that we've probably implemented 56, very generous 60% of the Constitution. A lot of things we have not. We have put the structures in place. If you ask, in terms of the institutional framework for implementation, we are probably at 80%, 90%. We've got the MCAs, we've got the commissions, but the next level, which is about now ensuring that we're implementing the substance of the Constitution, not just the framework. A lot of those we have not done. And you can go to every
goodwill,
chapter.
right?
It's about, a lot of it is goodwill, a lot of it is commitment. If you take the land chapter.
So are you saying that the commission under which you serve should have been given more time?
I'm not sure that a commission was the issue. I think the advantage of having a commission was that the profile of the Constitution remained high.
Yeah.
And don't forget that not only do we lose the commission, we even lost the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs in a country which had a new constitution, and that should have been a warning bell. So what we have done is we have forgotten. And back to what Jerry said, we have forgotten that we actually have a constitution that resolves a lot of our fundamental issues, even inclusion. You see, I think Kenyans understood by 2010 that it was going to be impossible to have everyone at the executive at the top.
Yep.
So that is why we devote, so that when people of Isiolo think of government, they see government, so they don't feel that they must also be in Nairobi, because
yes.
Nairobi was not going to be that strong. But because we have continued to empower Nairobi, everybody wants to be in Nairobi. So part of the solution of ensuring that Kenyans feel included, the political elite will always want to be included, of course. But if you really want Kenyans to feel included and therefore also support the elective process, empower devolved governments. Of course, check them. Create accountability mechanisms. That you must do. But empower them, because that is what will tell the people of West Pokot that government exists, because they see government services. They see the razzmatazz of government. When you go to West Pokot and the governor is going around and he's wearing his whatever and he has convoys, people used to complain about that. I'm one of those I once went to one of these far-flung counties and I thought, this is not a bad thing, because when will these people ever know that government exists, and so therefore they know that this is a person we hold accountable. We're not sitting here waiting for Nairobi. This is not a provincial commissioner who waits for instructions from Nairobi. This is our government. The fact that we didn't do that and instead have continually empowered Nairobi, when it comes to functions, we have not devolved functions to county governments. When we have devolved them and retained the money. Again, come back to BBI. BBI says, look, please transfer the functions for county governments to counties. You don't need BBI to tell you that.
Which the Constitution said in the first place.
There's even a transfer of devolved government law that devolved these things. There's something called funding follows functions. There is a requirement in the law, in the current public finance management law, that you must release all money to county governments every month. It is not released. In fact, last year, only about 65% of money had been released by the end of the year. So for me, what I'm saying, these things, government is saying we have failed in this report. Can you please do it?
I want to take you back.
Yes.
You gave an excellent example of how our peaceful our elections are, and they are.
Yeah.
And then you give an example of how the voting patterns actually reflect what happens at the top, and they do, if you go by 2017. In 2007, the complete opposite happened.
Yes.
How do you explain that?
By the way, 2007 was an unfortunate election. The last election we had that was a disaster. In fact, let me compare two elections. 2002 is said to be one of the most trusted elections. At a technical level, it was a very bad election. And you see, we track that by petitions. If you look at the petitions filed in 2002, a lot of them succeeded.
Yeah.
And the sorts of things you find is that, but somehow people trusted the elections. That's why I said the trust in the elections is not about the integrity of the election. In 2007, two things happened. There was a problem of integrity of the election. Very many people will tell you that you cannot really know. There was the election was compromised around the country.
Kriegler told us he couldn't tell us.
Yeah,
who
he
the
couldn't
winner
tell.
was.
That's really so there was that, and then number two, there was mistrust. So now you combine the problems of 2002 and what we have found in 2017, where even though the election in 2017 is technically okay, we have mistrust for it. In 2007, it was both. There was a problem, and you could see that in the petitions. If you look at the petitions for MPs in that year, many of them were set aside because there was a lot of tinkering with the results. By 2013, 2017, a lot of those technical challenges had been taken away. A very simple one, counting elections at the polling station. That fundamentally changes an election result. People forget that an election ends at 6. It's still daytime.
Yeah.
People are still there. Elections, the votes are counted in the classroom where people are. And there are usually about 500 votes. It's very difficult to actually compromise that process, to tinker with it. So the problem of our election, that's why I keep saying, the problem of our election is not its integrity, it's mistrust. And the mistrust is that there is no incentive to trust the election.
Are you therefore saying that these elections are devoid of any tampering whatsoever?
No. I keep saying I have been around long enough to know elections are tampered with. Remember, elections are never scientific. Even in America, which is the doyen of democracy, elections are tinkered with, as we have found out. The elections are tinkered with. I think the question, and that's why observers generally say that the result generally reflects the will of the people.
Where I'm going with this is with the electoral bodies.
Yes.
Because we've discussed elections and we've not discussed the bodies that are mandated to look after them.
Yeah.
Do we have a body that we can trust to ensure that we actually have a credible election?
I've seen one of the proposals by BBI to disband IEBC. I think that's okay. I think it will be good in terms of enhancing faith in the election. But I'm not sure that is a problem. Don't forget that the elections are not run from Nairobi. The elections are run by returning officers in Kasipul, Kabondo there.
Yeah.
One of the problems is because the people who run elections are local. Is that because they are local, they have a political interest. Particularly at the top. You see, the local elections, the MPs, whatever, they probably don't have as much of, But at that other level, people have a stake. And so when elections are compromised, part of the reason why elections are compromised is not that the problem happens at the top. It happens at the constituency level. Because a lot of these results are announced at constituency level. I used to say that if actually you want to deal with the question of results, instead of waiting in Nairobi for the Form 36 and 37. If you actually did a live recording of every result announcement, because what happens when people announce results, they don't know about what is happening in other places. So you don't know whether you are adding 5 votes here is going to make a difference. If you actually did a live recording, because all these results are announced publicly, if you did a live recording, you'd actually get 290 results. And you can actually do the maths because these things are recorded. What happens is that the results, once they come to Nairobi, at the point at which they are being collated, people believe that then those results are compromised. Now, if you have been to Bomas, it's almost impossible. In this day and age, there are so many people there. It is almost impossible. In these
To
days of
tinker with
phones,
it.
a form that is 36 that has 500 votes, you change it, it will be out here. So the truth of the matter is that largely, the results reflect the people's will. But we will not trust that result. And by the way, for good reason. Because of the way Kenya politics, government is very, very big. What you're telling people, especially as we weaken devolved systems, is that what you're saying now, you're relegating us to the periphery of access to resources. That is the message you're sending when you deny us a seat at the table.
At the top.
That is what people want.
But then if we're talking about trust, it's about trusting the electoral system itself, not just necessarily the body. Whose duty is that to ensure that we get into that trust? Is it the politicians? Is it the people? Is it the institution itself? The electoral management body?
Eric, the institution would help. I mean, some of the sort of bungling that were done by the IEBC was not helpful. The fights between the CEO and the various wings of IEBC were not helpful because then people think, why are you fighting? There must be something. Obviously, the reports that have come out there were some things that were done that were wrong in the procurement process, in the way that some of these things were managed. I think that doesn't help build. It increases the trust deficit. But that again is not really the issue. I think it would be very helpful if you had someone or the chair of the IEBC, somebody we can trust, and we know that person has a record of us trusting. What I suspect is most people like that want nothing to do with IEBC. So that's also part of the problem, that the people now we encourage going to IEBC are not the same people, because they know that on it's usually the 11th of August. By the 18th of August, we will want to skin them. We all remember Chiloba's mutation from being the best guy to the worst one.
To Chiloba must go.
So we know that. So part of the problem is that we also then attract people then we will not trust. So it would help for us to change that institution. But fundamentally what we need to know is that that trust deficit arises because there is no incentive to trust that election. There is no incentive for me as a leader to imbue trust in that election.
And that's what BBI is trying to address by saying that you let some of the losers also come and have a seat at the table.
It's part of it. It
Both
doesn't
at the
solve
national
everything,
level
but
and
it
at the
does,
county
yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Kamotho Waiganjo is a constitutional lawyer. He's with us on the hot seat this morning in the Situation Room. Now we'll open up the phone lines for about 10 minutes. 0719-012-600. That's 0719-012-600. You can also post your questions and comments on Spice FM KE Facebook, at Spice FM KE on Twitter. The hashtag is the Situation Room. Good morning.
Somehow antagonize 2 points that have been raised by the speaker. First is, he was talking of the elections in 2002, 2013 and 17. He said that the elections of MPs, the governors and the senators were reflective of what was happening at the national level. Now, the city Muga asked him a question. Could he say the same of 2007? I don't think he has answered it correctly, because if it was a reflective of if the election of MPs and senators and governors was a reflective of the presidency level, then definitely 2007, we know what happened. The person who had the most MPs would have been the president. Second, he's saying that there is no tinkering of election at the primary level, that is at the constituency, at the ward level. That is very wrong. My friend, Musando would have not been killed if those things are not tampered at the national level. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you, Alan. Respond to them, Kamotho.
To Alan, thanks. That's a good question. Elections 2007, the MPs. I think one of the problems is that people look at elections 2007 MPs from purely President Kibaki's party. But people forget that President Kibaki's party was a coalition. So if you actually look at the entire PNU and its partners, the number of MPs and for both the NASA coalition, ODM coalition, and PNU are generally almost the same. The difference is not significant.
Were they a coalition going into the elections or after the elections?
They were a coalition before. Remember, they had a big event just about not too long before the elections. Muskari Combo, even though they retained their parties,
but
they went to the
as
elections
PNU.
as a coalition. So if you take the party alone, it looks like it doesn't have very many MPs. But if you take the entire coalition, then it's reflective. Number two, on tinkering, I think the fact of the matter is that the tinkering at the national level, a lot of it is. I'm trying to look for a kind of word. The reality is that it is very difficult. It is very difficult in this day and age to actually do fundamental tinkering of the elections, even at the national level. Don't forget that even in the petition in 2017, there was not actually any result presented to challenge the result of IEBC. What was presented was irregularities in the transmission process. You know what I mean? And that is important because that goes to the verifiability of the result.
Yeah.
But I suspect if we had results that were changed, you know, which were proven, they would have been presented. You know what I mean? That,
Yes.
you know, and so I'm saying that. And by the way, I'm not saying it's a perfect process, Alan. I'm not saying that, you know, there are no changes that can be made. But I'm just saying the result fundamentally reflects Kenyans'
The
choice.
will of the people.
Yeah.
Take another one. Rotich is in Mombasa. Good morning, Rotich.
Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Salama kabisa.
Wakili, habari yako?
Mzuri sana, Rushich.
Now, my comments on the issue. Let me touch first on the issue of tinkering with the polls.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to differ with the gentleman who was just on air a minute ago that it does happen in the wards or the polling centers at the ground. I would say close to 98% of the tinkering happens beyond the constituency level. At the ward level, I participated in the 2007 general election, and I also participated in the 2017 general elections as an officer on the ground. And I would want to say the tinkering does not happen there simply because the agents are there for the respective parties, for the respective candidates. And as the tallying happens, the counting and the sealing of the boxes and the filling of the forms happens. They are archived. They just see what happens, and they
many people
raise
watching.
an alarm. Yes, there are too many people watching, and more so, you would not want to mess things on the ground simply because things can go haywire. People can start killing each other there and then. So you see, as the now the results starts moving up the hierarchy, that's when the tinkering happens.
So how do you suppose this tinkering happens? Because this is what Kamotho is saying. In this day and age, it's nearly impossible. So even after it has gone to the constituency tallying center, how do you suppose it happens then at national level?
I can't clearly or point actually how it clearly does happen, but where I can agree with Wakili is when there is something like a live recording of when the data is being not relayed but collected or tallied, you can get the actual number of results from each and every of the 290 constituencies, and you sum them up, and you know the results that have come up.
Right.
Now there is the issue of management, the body mandated to manage our polls. You see, the issue of trust comes out, and it is one of the issues that usually makes Kenyans or the voters not trust what they do.
Thank you,
And
Rotich.
simply because, just a moment, Eric, listen, it is what contributes so much to this is the aspect of when these bodies are constituted, we try to pull or tear them apart based on our tribal issues. Simply because you want to say, my community is not represented in that body. I cannot trust that. Why is it only 5 commissioners from the same community? Why is it 2 commissioners from the same community? And that kind of mistrust leads to not people trusting what they are mandated to manage. Yes.
Asante sana, Rotich. Have a good day in Mombasa.
You too.
Agreeing with you.
Oh, yes, I was going to say 2 things. By the way, one of the proposals that the BBI makes that I think is not well thought through is about the involvement of political parties in the appointing IBC commissioners. That can be problematic. We need to find a way that still recognizes that this body requires political support, but people don't go there as representatives of a political party. Because once they go, I can guarantee you they will not sign a result that, especially if it's a close result. So that's number 2 is to say this, that the process between 2007 and 2017, the technical process of election has greatly improved. Now, anecdotal evidence, it's not always helpful. But the way you know is by the petitions, because petitions are by losers. And people who are losers, they come with evidence. If you look at the petitions this year, a majority of them were thrown. Of course, a few of them were thrown technically, but a majority of them were thrown because the evidence was not there. The reason being that when you talk about elections in the classroom, that vote in the ward, that paper, every agent carries that result. And that is the result that is read in the constituency. If you try and change that result, because those people don't go home, they will scream, and remember that those results are read in the presence of everybody. So if something like that happened, we would know that there's an attempt to that. People will ban election offices. So the truth of the matter is that it is becoming increasingly difficult. It is not impossible, but it's becoming increasingly difficult
to tinker with the election.
Yes.
Just a quick question before you leave.
Yes.
I'm hoping you won't leave, actually. You'll stay on for a bit longer. Before we get to the top of the hour. Back to the BBI. And there's some provisions in there that we know Parliament won't pass. For instance, when it comes to slowing down on their expenses and so on.
Yes.
Do you then see the need, as Justin Muturi has said, for this to go to a referendum because Parliament simply won't put the instruments in place to allow to give effect to the BBI?
You'll respond to that when you come back.
Okay.
So let's go to the top of the hour and then take a look at traffic, and then we'll request Kamotho Waiganjo to stay with us for another at least 5 minutes to respond to our questions. And then, of course, you can join in our subsequent conversations. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. The guest on the hot seat this morning is Kamotho Waiganjo, constitutional lawyer. He was a member of the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution. We're looking at the implementation of the current Constitution. We're also looking at the BBI report. Good morning. It's 9 o'clock.